We have quite a few things in common. You like whiskey, I like whiskey.
I must say, because of old age, now coffee is taken precedence over whiskey, by the way.
Oh, really?
Not everything will be good.
Yeah, yeah.
So, weight is a metaphor for premiumness.
Wow.
I want to be associated with a Nike, maybe not a Reebok.
Very, very relevant, very simple, very, very crisp.
The most cringeworthy thing I've ever heard in my life. Everyone wants to be an Amazon, but no one wants to do things Amazon does.
I see today a lot of brands are moving away from storytelling.
And how poor storytelling is from typical legacy marketers. 99% of the subset who commented on Jaguar will probably never own a Jaguar.
What?
But it is what it is, right? I'm gonna get killed for this.
Nice. Super. Let's start.
A few moments later. One eternity later.
I'm thinking what else I can share on these.
Oh no.
Oh, wait.
Welcome to the Empowered Marketer. Hello and welcome to the next episode of The Empowered Marketer, a podcast where we bring insights, strategies, and success stories from the brightest mind in the world of marketing. I'm your host Mukesh Agrawal, and I have a dynamic and a young marketeer who has spent incredible amount of time building brands. Adithya Venkatesan is a seasoned brand marketer. He has deep expertise of building 0 to 1 startups and scaling 1 to 10 organizations. He has worked with great companies like Gojek, Misho, and Routers. He's just not a brand marketer, he's a great storyteller. He has built amazing brands. He's done incredible amount of storytelling, especially at Gojek, which I have personally witnessed. His dynamism, his acceptance to new technologies, what's happening in the world of marketing, and he tries to read a lot and bring those reading to implementation. This show is definitely going to be super insightful, and I hope this will help you in your journey of marketing. Thank you very much and enjoy the show. Welcome to the next episode of The Empowered Marketer. Hi Aditya, welcome to the show.
Hello, Mukesh. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for accepting to be here. I've been following you for a long time. We've worked together as in when you were in Gojek.
Yeah.
I've always looked up to you
Thank
about
you
your
so much.
writing, your thought process. We have a lot of similarities. You like whiskey, I do like whiskey. You like the whole startup scene. I cannot, like, if you start a discussion on startups, I'll not stop.
Same.
Marketing is again a field where we both share a lot of commonality.
Yeah.
So I'm super super excited to have this, and
Awesome.
I'm sure it'll be great insightful for our audience as well.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here. I must say, because of old age, now coffee is taken precedence over whiskey, by the way.
Oh really? Shit.
It's all coffee now.
Now where will I get my recommendations from?
I have to tell you a whole bunch of them, but after this, we will
Nice,
for sure.
super. Let's start.
Awesome.
You are a voracious reader, and you move from subjects to subject,
Yeah.
history, marketing, philosophy, uh, etc., etc. You're like a polymath, and I've read your blogs before the show, and
Awesome.
super super crazy thoughts, connecting things here and there, and which we will double click on a lot of things now. uh, I'll start with some context, not context setting, but just warming up
Sure.
our show.
Sure.
How does value, according to you,
Hmm.
values of an individual helps them in decision making? I'm just trying to pick some of your philosophical
Got it.
lens
Got
before
it.
we deep dive into marketing.
Got it. So the way I look at this is, uh, we are and we will always be status driven in some sense or the other, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And this has been an age old phenomenon, and it will continue to do so as brands get more prevalence in how they function. And as long as we're status driven, there is some form of signaling that we'll always do to have perceived value than what we think that value that we get from a particular
Yeah.
product. So think of the IKEA effect, right?
Yeah.
There is a sense of a perceived value on what you look at when you buy a piece of furniture than what that value is. And the IKEA effect basically says that when you build the furniture and when you use your hands,
Yeah.
you have a different perception of that value than what it is actually valued at, and that's the IKEA effect.
Wow.
And I always look at all brands in terms of value, and what they generate is highly determined by how a brand basically communicates their proposition to you. So let me sort of balance this in an interesting sort of way. Have you heard of this thing called satisficing?
That's one of the question I have, but let's
Oh,
jump
okay.
into it. So
So,
yeah, let's go
okay.
for that.
Okay. No, then we should come.
No, no, no. It's okay.
Okay.
That's same thing.
Cool.
I would want to know more on that.
Okay. So I read about satisficing a long time back, and then I like how people can augment and give you a definition of what this means, right? So if you look at brand satisficing, what satisficing says is we're abrogating the choice of rationality to someone else because of the perceived brand value that we have, right? So we don't know how to determine an optimal solution,
Okay.
and therefore we abrogate that decision making process to a brand, right?
Okay.
Which is why, and not because the product is necessarily good,
Hmm.
but you know that it's not bad, right?
Got
That
it.
there's a very subtle difference in that, and
Hmm.
and therein lies the brand wedge. So you rather buy an apple because you have abrogated choice where you
Hmm.
know it's not bad
Hmm.
than maybe another brand. I don't want to name another brand, but
Hmm.
you don't want to buy a subpar brand because you don't know whether it's good or not, even
Got
if
it.
it is good. So
Got
I'll
it.
give you an example to understand
Yeah.
this, right? I don't know which year this was. Coca-Cola introduced a glacier water,
Okay.
right? And it's basically water. You evaporate it, you distill it, and then it's just water.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. But what Coke said, it's inspired by the clouds.
Wow.
It's basically water.
Same thing.
It's just a great idea of taking something and then you sort of normalize it in some sense, and then you have a perceived value associated with it. Until date, if you look at a bottle of Perrier and if you look at any other bottle that's beside it, you will, and if it's free, you will pick the bottle of Perrier because there's a
Absolutely.
certain sense of
Yes.
brand association with it. So when you think of value in that sense, we all are status driven, and as long as we continue to be status driven, I'll have a job. Otherwise, I am jobless.
Nice. I love the satisficing, right?
Yeah,
That's the word,
satisficing. Yes.
concept. And
Yeah.
I'll give an example recently, and I did not
Okay.
know this word, but now I can relate to it.
Hmm.
My wife runs a home decor brand, and she was asking one of my cousins that help me with identifying any software where I can manage my inventory, etc., etc.
Hmm.
And my cousin, gave him an option of Odoo. I think that's how it's pronounced.
Okay.
And then she told me that my cousin had told her about Odoo brand, and I could quickly think, why did he say Odoo? It was just because he saw some of the ads of Odoo
Top of
in
the
some of the
mind.
top of
Yeah.
the mind,
Yeah.
and in absence of anything else,
Yeah.
he was able to say this. So
Yeah.
it's sort of satisfying
Yeah.
when you don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
What you have seen is what you think is right.
Yeah. And which is why brands spend a lot. Like one of the questions that keep coming, right? Why do brands spend so much on IPL?
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
There is no other medium or that has such a captive audience as much as IPL in India. So being there is not it's not an option sometimes, especially when you have the money,
Yeah,
right? You want to have some presence around an IPL because that's where you have such a large captive audience.
yeah,
Um, and whenever people question why should a startup sponsor something like an IPL, I always tell them that that's your largest captive audience.
yeah.
And there are certain brands who sit in a niche emotion or a niche perception.
Correct.
Like you rightly pointed out, top of the mind recall will always be that brand. And some
Absolutely.
brands continuously enjoy it because they hunker down on one or two mediums that will always be their strongest points, and they will never deviate from that strongest point.
Correct. And I think the great example, Cred, and before that,
Yeah.
Kunal Shah built Free Charge also
Yeah.
on riding on the IPL wave, and
Yeah.
both the brands when he launched, it was IPL where they used it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Credit
absolutely.
is definitely one of
And also,
those.
I
Yeah.
love the IKEA example, and
Yeah.
I also did not know this IKEA way of doing things.
Uh-huh.
In our office, we bought some of the furniture from IKEA,
Huh.
and we were just doing up the office. And on one of the Sundays, the we got the furniture,
Hmm.
and I took my daughter, 1.5 years old, and I was fixing it,
Huh.
and I took the whole day to fix it. I got really tired, but I enjoyed the whole process.
Huh.
And even today, when I just go to the office, I just sit in one of the sofas,
Huh.
not realizing why I'm sitting,
Huh.
but it just I feel so satisfying.
Yeah.
So I think there is definitely a way of,
Yeah. There's definitely an emotional reason to it.
absolutely.
I'll give you another one. This is for Legos. And Legos is basically you get raw pieces, you build it, right? And a lot of adults use Lego. I've
Yeah.
stumbled upon Lego now and I love building it. And so one of the pieces I bought, I think it was about 35,000 rupees or so. It cannot cost that much. It just should not
Yeah,
cost that much.
absolutely. It's crazy.
But the emotional value I ascribe to this Lego now is intangible. Like I cannot let anyone else build my Lego. I can't let anyone else sort of fiddle with it because there is a value component to it
Wow.
that is incredibly high. And there are many examples. So I'll give you another one. This is I call this the Dyson effect, right? Dyson is a mop.
Yeah.
There is not a single person who will put a traditional mop in their hall,
Hmm.
but a Dyson will always be in the hall. It's ultimately a cleaning equipment, but
Yes.
it will be there right in the center of your hall because you want to ascribe a certain value, a certain premiumness to it, and you want to status signal the value of it. A mop will never get that
Otherwise,
recognition,
yeah.
but a Dyson always will.
Thank you, Dyson, for giving mop its real value.
Yep.
So you have, dabbled from being a correspondent at routers and
Yeah.
then moved into marketing,
Yeah.
uh, built brands like Gojek, and then worked with Misho, etc.
Yeah.
How did this transition happen for you?
So I think being a journalist is extremely hard, and in all honesty, I'm not cut out for it. You have to be a pessimist, and you have to hold, power accountable to truth. And I have never been, I've been an optimist all throughout
Okay.
my life, and I've realized that journalism is a hard job, and very few are really cut out to do it, right? And you will see a lot of journalists eventually move out, and the ones who stay there are really good at what they do, and they're
Yeah.
wired to the news cycle, right?
Yeah.
I am just not as talented to do the regular news cycle. So yeah, I turned into a propagandist basically, and I said this is what I'm good at,
Huh.
and I've realized, how a builder gets a certain high when they build a certain company, right?
Correct.
When they there's a certain high ascribed to it.
Yeah.
No matter how many hours it takes, you ask most founders, their high is building something,
Correct.
and even some of the most richest people who can retire and relax in their life, no, they want to be able to build something because that's their high. For me, that high is being able to change someone's perception about something, right?
Okay.
And it can be as simple as someone recommending a restaurant and saying, "Hey, this dish is really good. You should
Hmm.
go try it."
Hmm.
And someone tries it and they call you and say, "Hey, I love this restaurant. Thank you so much." There's a certain high in you being enabling that recommendation.
Yeah.
And for me, doing that for a brand is magical. I think there's a certain amazing high when you're able to do that and change a certain perception for a brand. And I quickly stumbled on marketing when I realized how much you can do and how poor storytelling is from typical legacy marketers. And that's essentially how I stumbled on
And
marketing.
who gave you the break from being a journalist to
So
handling marketing or
I joined a public relations agency. There's this
okay.
lady called Sonali
Okay.
who I think is still at Quaker. I'm not sure.
Okay.
At that point, she was with Gutenberg, which is the agency, and she
Okay.
basically threw it up as a challenge and said, "Why don't
Okay.
you come and work in PR?" And PR, I think, was very nascent stages then. I still feel it's not as evolved as it
Hmm.
should be when you compare it to the US. But I got very lucky because I got to work with brands like InMobi, Razorpay,
Oh,
and so
interesting.
on and so forth. And then, yeah, that's
Interesting.
essentially how it all
Interesting.
happened.
So, you mentioned you love to change
Yeah,
perceptions. Uh, in brands, when you work with brands and when
yeah,
you try to do that,
yeah,
obviously there is a gestation period to do that, to
yeah.
get results. How do you wait for it? Because
Got
it
it.
would not happen in 6 months,
Yeah,
it would
yeah,
take years maybe.
got it.
What keeps
Uh,
you driving in such duration, lead time?
yeah. I think if you just look at this from a hygiene journey, right? When you make a purchase decision, you want to be able to. Now, so it depends on what brand as well, but largely the heuristics remain the same, right?
Okay.
When you want to make a purchasing decision, you will vet this product adequately enough. So if you look at a consumer brand, if I want to buy a phone, I'm going to look at YouTube videos, I'm going to look at comparisons, I'm going to look at their
Yeah.
potentially their blog, what they say about the brand, etc., etc., etc. Right? Amazon reviews, so on. But if you take like a SaaS brand, I want to go and check external reviews. What reviews have they got?
Yeah.
I want to potentially speak to other people who've used the product, so on and so forth. Right? So in any quest to build a brand, first is your hygiene that you need to have,
Hmm.
right? Which is owned. So the way I divide this is in paid, owned, earned.
Okay.
Earned is essentially what others speak about you and you have no control about it,
Okay.
right? That's earned. Paid is what you pay for.
Correct.
And this is essentially advertising, large billboards, all of that, right? And
Digital
owned,
marketing,
digital
anything.
marketing, everything, you pay for it. The sweet spot is owned. This is
Okay.
where you have complete control. And owned is what are your channels, right? Right. And if you break this down, there are typical ones: your blog, your website, your social media channels. All of these are one. And then your employees are also one, right? How do they go and talk about your brand? And a good metric for me to gauge any brand is to see how many employees are going and actively talking about on social channels.
You
Are
got it.
they advocating for their brand? And you will notice that, for example, a lot of brands that I see, they have more than 1,200 employees,
Yeah.
but barely two, three people apart from the leadership will ever talk about that brand.
Yeah.
Why? Because then you get an idea of where the brand
Yeah.
dilemma is. Uh, so my goal would be, I mean, the ideal scenario is one, augment owned, and two is what kind of policy effect changes you can do to ensure that that brand perception is much higher. And I'm speaking about this from an employer branding perspective,
Yeah.
but also speaking about it from the perspective of how can I look at my earned channel and say what is the quotient of influencers or people who are organically speaking about your brand. Basically, once you bridge that gap, then you have a quotient that you can double up on. But it used to be a long haul,
Hmm.
but I've also course corrected my methodology now, right? Because these playbooks are now far more easier to access.
Correct.
You have talent as well who are far more mature to get how to do this. Social channels, people have tapped into understand how a social channel works. So I think there is a brief gestation period,
Yeah.
but I think in 6 to 9 months you're able to solidify a brand in some sense, and then it's about hunkering down and building a
Things
message
which are
around it.
working. You see
Yeah,
some green
yeah,
shoots.
yeah, exactly.
So there are quite a few things. By the way, I'll write because you're saying quite a few things which I want to
Yeah,
double click on.
sure, sure,
So just don't mind me writing there.
sure.
So you mentioned about owned,
Yeah,
and you are saying let's park. Earned is
yeah,
something beyond your control.
yeah,
Paid is in your control, but then you need money for that.
yes,
And as this show is largely about helping SMBs,
yeah,
I would want to double click on the owned part.
got
So
it.
uh, there are a lot of brands who wants to do marketing and they have
Yeah,
always this constraint of money.
yeah,
So in the owned space, what more or what all steps should a brand take, like what you mentioned?
got it.
You might have a decent employee base which
Yeah.
could be 500, whatever, whatever.
Hmm.
Now how do brands go about asking or rather enabling their employees or
Got it.
their team members to advocate the brand? How do they go about doing that, and other things which they should do
Got it.
to sort of amplify the whole own part?
Understood. So, firstly, I think it should happen organically, ideally, right? It should happen organically. And what I mean by that is if you like the work you're doing, you want to talk about it.
Okay.
I think where a marketer comes into play is how to talk about it, and sometimes why to talk about it. Because when I work with engineers, product people, they're so obsessed with solving that problem.
Yes.
Once it's solved, they don't want to delve in it ever again. They want to move on, right? But a marketer is once the problem is solved, then the marketer wants to market the fact that it's solved. That's
Correct.
so our work begins
When the job
when
ends.
where their job ends, right? So identifying and solving that is where work starts. And the best way to do this is uh, when I speak to engineers and product people, right, they seldom are able to capture that this is meaningful enough to do, right? And if you see now, a lot of listed companies, like for example, Zomato, full credit to them, even the most simple features that they have a cadence, and I'm sure it's planned and
Yeah.
thought through, where they talk about it, right? Back in the day, at when I was at Gojek, feature launches were feature built, tested with a small beta, works, makes sense, alpha, full launch, move on, next project,
Got
please.
it.
And then I'd go and tell someone, hey, this is a very interesting feature. You should talk about it. And they'd be
Yeah.
like, no, no, I'm working on something else now, right? And a marketer's work is basically going and finding why this feature makes sense and then talking about it, which is
Hmm.
what now leadership is doing. So for me, an ambassador program, and I call these ambassador programs, by the way, right? Identifying 15, 20 people within the organization who are heavy hitters, who are really good at what they do, and they become ambassadors for your
Hmm.
company. They are the strongest advocates for you, because these folks can not only sell product, they can help recruit, and they can go and get big ticket, especially for SaaS companies, right? They can go and get big ticket clients to come and work
Yes.
with you. And for me, it all starts with how do you have a singular voice in that company? Like, I do these freelance projects where
Okay.
someone comes and says, give me like a brand quotient of where we stand, right? I want to train my leadership in
Hmm.
how to do brand, right? So one of the exercises I do, I take a piece of paper, I put
Okay.
it across everyone, and I say, what is the company moniker, right?
Okay.
Like, let's say this, right? Like, let's say Media Ant.
Hmm.
How do you define Media Ant in 3 words?
Got
How do you
it.
define Media Ant in 10 words, right? In 30 words. And then you'll understand how your leadership itself is thinking differently, right? You don't have a singular
Yes.
voice across the company.
Yes.
And this is not, it's not exactly fluff, right? To say that, hey, no, we are saying it's just a
Yeah, it's
one
a
bunch of
gyan and all
random
that.
words. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not exactly random words, because sometimes you want to pick up metrics which state that you are the best at what you do, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking of a good example for this, right? Like, mm, um, let's take the words of metaphors to explain this in some
Yeah.
sense, right? Let's take the Bentley car.
Okay.
The Bentley car door is intentionally extremely heavy,
Hmm.
and it doesn't need to be heavy, right? A door, it depends on the levers, and you close the door, it's done. But
Hmm.
why is it so heavy? Because when you close the door, when you move the door, you get a sense of premiumness associated with that door, right? So
Wow.
weight is a metaphor for premiumness, right? And if you look at these, a lot of these examples, you want to be able to explain why your startup has or a company has a niche in a particular space.
Interesting.
Whole Truth is a great example that says no
Transparency.
advertiser, exactly, transparency. So when you speak about Whole Truth, your leadership and people have to say clean ingredients, extreme transparency
Yeah.
in our products. If you don't hit those two words, and I don't know what those two words are for them, but if you don't have a singular voice where all of them have these two words, you've probably lost brand salience in some sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the long winding answer is, uh, to get a sense of how everyone has a singular voice,
Yeah.
but more importantly, what are those two, three differentiators that no one else can touch? And
Got it.
you are probably the only brand that has that quotient. And if you don't have a differentiator, then you have bigger problems, right? Then
Yeah.
it's not
Then
a
you have to
marketing
solve for
thing. Yeah,
something
you have
else.
to solve for
Yeah.
something else. Yeah,
So coming back to
yeah,
the having the ambassadors, and I remember
yeah,
when we were chatting in, I think, 2019, 2018,
yeah.
and I was asking you, how do you get content from engineers, which is so difficult to get,
Hmm.
and you have a very tough task at
Yeah,
hand. And you told me that you run something like a program internally where
yeah,
you incentivize
yeah,
and you get some content from engineers,
yeah,
which then you are able to amplify to the outside world. Can
yeah.
you take us through that again?
Yeah, so one is we incentivized this whole process, right? We said, if you write an article that passes a certain quality check, then you get incentivized for it. But these are all people who earn like a
Yeah,
lot
yeah,
of
they don't,
money,
it
right?
doesn't matter.
I can't give a 10,000 rupee Amazon voucher and say they'll be like, we don't care, right? So then, so we nonetheless incentivized it,
Hmm.
right? Because it's a small carrot. But what we used to do is, every piece that an engineer writes, the obligation from the team is then how can you promote this to get the maximum eyeballs. So I'll give
Correct.
you one example. One of the pieces an engineer wrote, we I didn't know Hacker News at that point, right?
Yeah.
2018, 29. I didn't know about Hacker News. And one of my colleagues basically, actually one of my engineering friends said, "There's Hacker News and this is what it does." And one of my colleagues said, "You know what? I'm going to just post it. Let's see where it goes."
Yeah.
Posted on Hacker News, It went
Boom.
crazy viral, right? And Hacker News is that platform where not everything will be good, right?
Yeah,
People will want to poke
yeah.
holes at everything.
Yeah.
But I've realized engineers don't work in that mode, right? It's not like good, bad. No,
Yeah.
they love the feedback they get with an article. Ignorance is the worst way to look at this, or just sharing it and then everyone says, "Oh, amazing." No,
Hmm.
engineers love feedback. They love someone poking holes at this, right?
Wow.
In fact, it became a great way to even recruit people because the metrics we sort of measured is I'd always go and ask, okay, we posted this blog and we sort of micro segmented this blog and posted snippets of it across social channels. How many LinkedIn requests did you get, or how many Twitter followers did you get? How many people reached out on this? How many people commented on that post? So on and so forth. That incentive is invaluable. And the moment that started happening, which is recognition and validation for the work you did, only for the first 9 months or so, I struggled and I had to reach out to people and say, hey, please give me content. This is worth your effort, this is worth your time. But after that, then I had to police and say, this is not good enough. And this quality of, we need a better bar for what we look at content as. And that's changed now. Now, I mean, everyone wants, everyone understands the importance of brand, everyone understands their brand persona matters. So, yeah, different problems now.
Yeah, interesting. Employer branding as
Yeah.
a subject or a piece
Yeah.
overall in marketing is something very very. It's not given a lot of importance. There are
Yeah.
fewer companies who are doing it,
Yeah.
and largely people or companies who are in B2B space
Hmm.
who doesn't have a front end
Yeah.
do that. And also I think it got limited to a lot more of paid marketing and not so much of storytelling. But I've
Yeah.
seen you and at Gojek a
Yeah.
huge storytelling, a lot of emphasis on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, how do you as in what are the metrics you follow
Got it.
to see that it is working for the brand?
Yeah. I think firstly, right, I think this everything I did for Gojek was a lot of marketing and brand, right? Someone in a suit wanted to augment like what does this mean? Like what position is this person doing? And
Yeah.
then this employer branding came into effect. But if you look at the work I did, talking about features, talking about the product, talking about engineering, talking about interesting design things, talking about culture. This is basically marketing.
Yes.
There is one is you're marketing a product, one is you're marketing an ideal, right?
Correct.
And if you look at even a consumer persona, and I'll go back to the first point we made, right? As status driven,
Hmm.
I want to be associated with a certain brand because it has a certain status to it. So if you look at it from that prism, I want to be associated with a Nike, maybe not a Reebok, right? Or maybe not a more local brand.
Yeah.
And that's because of what Nike stands for, right?
Correct.
And the conversations they have with that. So, and I go back to the simple point, right? Everything to do with employer branding is basically marketing. It's just that you're defining it as employer branding.
Yeah.
And of course, storytelling forms the crux of this. So let's, if you even if you take like a SaaS example, right? Uh, Talking about a feature about SaaS is helping someone explain and understand how this is solving a problem statement of mine, right?
Yeah.
So while I did a lot of work around branding, it got slotted into this idea of employee branding, right? And in terms of metrics, I think I was very fortunate in early on where none of these vanity metrics really mattered, like
Got it.
impressions,
Yeah.
likes, like even till date when someone says your North Star KPIs to increase LinkedIn followers is the most cringeworthy thing I've ever heard in my life, right? It's utterly useless. I rather focus on the input metrics of what it takes
Hmm.
to have a certain quotient, right? Because you post a meme, you post something funny, you will
You'll
get
get some
followers, yeah,
followers.
you will get those impressions. But what
Yeah.
does that mean? Has it moved the quotient for your brand? Absolutely not. Anyone can post memes, right?
Correct.
Uh, yeah. So the metrics that I really looked at, a bunch of interesting things, and this is
Yeah.
because I had really good bosses, right? One metric, and this is a very really funny metric, is how many people wore the Gojek branded T-shirt and would sort of post about it on social
Hmm.
channels. Was a good metric. Another one would be how many people shared this article
Hmm.
or shared this piece of content, right? And you get some insight around that. Another one would be how many people actually sent this article to leadership or anyone said, hey, this is really interesting, I really like this piece of content, right? So things like that, right? It was anomalous metrics. But if I were to double up on it, one was cost per developer resume, which is
Okay.
the amount of money spent, including my salary and my
Hmm.
team's salary, and how a tier one developer inbound, like what is the resume count we got for that. So we divide the cost, divide the number of resumes we got from tier one companies, and that becomes a good metric to measure. And are we moving that metric, right? So cost per developer resume was
That's
one.
pretty good. Cost
Yeah,
per
cost per
developer.
developer resume is one. Another one was people who joined Gojek at that point. We'd ask them, how did you hear about Gojek? Right? And there's a survey, and this was done manually. There's no one
Okay.
response. So we'd go one by one, make them fill the survey, give them the time, and then we'd potentially query them as well. And then we realized what are our most effective channels. Is marketing working or not? And I remember at that point, I think in my yearly presentation when I did, more than 70% of the people, sorry, more than 80, 90% of the people heard about Gojek because of a marketing activity.
Wow.
Um, of course, this is because we don't have a product here, right? So that
Correct.
survey made sense. But when I worked with Misho, that survey did not make any sense.
Yeah.
So for Misho, there was a lot of surveys in on LinkedIn, Twitter, to basically understand top of the mind recall when we say engineering or when we say product or when we say design, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? So yeah, things like that made a lot of sense.
Got it.
Yeah.
Um, on the point where you mentioned, you track how many people are sharing an
Hmm.
article, wearing a T-shirt and stuff like that. T-shirt is
Yeah.
still fine. On
Yeah.
the sharing of articles and videos and stuff like that,
Yeah.
how does one go about it? So, for example, if the
Hmm.
article is really good, now
Yeah.
good can differ from person to person.
Yeah.
How do you go about so that
Determining the
your
quality. Yeah.
team members shares it more?
Yeah.
Are there ways to do that, or you just do a good job and sit tight?
I think quality of content is extremely important. It has to have a bar for high quality. I think in Gojek basically I had this thing called the Sith Council, which is a Star Wars reference, of like 6 7 people.
Yeah.
Uh, it was 9 people if I'm not mistaken at that point, and at least 5 people had to say this is good
Good.
to go
Yeah.
initially, right? Because engineer heavily technical pieces I didn't get the head or tail of. And again, that metric was if Aditya doesn't get it, it probably is good only. So one is 5 6 people had to veto it. But a metric I really liked looking at is, do 1 or 2 people have extremely strong opinions on this piece? Good or bad, right? They'd be
Okay.
like, no, why is this like this, or why is this not good enough, or what is wrong with this, and the way it's disseminated. When you have strong opinions on something, you probably care for it. That's the only reason you have strong opinions.
Correct.
People have strong opinions on cred because, in some sense, they care for it,
Yeah.
right? If you pull out the numbers for cred, you'll get a better picture of how well they have done. So, my understanding of this is any article that has strong opinions is bound to do well. And then you look at distribution layers, because I always think we are the tyranny of social channels, right? You
Hmm.
have to have a LinkedIn, Twitter,
Yeah.
a Hacker News, and you're at the behest of them to get distribution. That's the only way you're going to get distribution. I also tried building a WhatsApp channel. It did reasonably well, but I left Gojek after that. So you have to have solid distribution, high bar for content. People will share it.
Got it.
And then, of course, we also share it internally in our Slack channels and so on. And when people don't share it, every once in a while, I used to go and ask them, like, why would you not share this? Is this something
Yeah.
I'm missing? And sometimes we do get good inputs, right? Maybe not good enough,
Yeah.
so on and so forth. But I don't. I'll give you one example on this since we're high on anecdotes
Yeah.
today. Amazon has a great culture on this, right? Everyone wants to be an Amazon, but no one wants to do things Amazon
Yeah. With the
does.
difficult tasks.
Exactly, they're difficult tasks. So, in Amazon's leadership meetings, they have their weekly business reviews. It's
Yeah.
called WBRs. Uh, they have output metrics, input metrics.
Okay.
Output metrics are usually laggards. No, almost little to no focus is done on it, right?
Okay.
Heavily focused on input metrics, like what is the input that goes into building something, right? So if you tangibly take this into
Hmm.
account in this example,
Hmm.
if my output is to get let's give another example, right? If my output is to get high amount of customers to come to my platform, my input has to be, what is my, like
Awareness.
yeah, what is my awareness like, or what is the quality I'm putting in that solves a particular
Yeah.
problem, right? So if your output is ultimately failing, it's not like you can do anything magical there. You
Yeah.
have to come back to what your inputs are. So why? So most brands fall into this pit, or marketers fall into this pit where they're like, why is my output not working? They
Correct.
don't obsess on why is my input not right. So ultimately, it's a quality issue. You come back
Correct.
and say, can I obsess on inputs? And that's where quality of content comes into play. When you have strong input metrics, your output
Output
metrics
will.
invariably will be good. When you have output metrics as the measure, things get very, very wonky. And so, one last
Yeah,
example on
yeah.
this, right? This is the Goodhart law
Hmm.
fallacy. So, Goodhart's law is basically this fallacy that says it's not a fallacy, it's just a law.
Hmm.
It says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So, an example of this is in British India,
Hmm.
they essentially there are a lot of cobras, right? And they
Yeah.
wanted to reduce
Ah,
the
yeah.
amount of cobras.
Huh.
So then the British India basically said, if you catch a cobra and you come and give it to us,
We'll
we
pay
will
you something.
remunerate for it for you in the hope that cobras will reduce and everyone can be happy and safe. Cobra population went off the charts, and the
People
only
start
reason
breeding
they
cobras.
started breeding cobras, right? So if you, it's a very interesting way to look at this. I'll give you another
Huh.
example of this, and this is a fallacy that not many people know of. This is called
Huh.
the McNamara fallacy.
Okay.
The McNamara was a politician in the US, and the McNamara fallacy is when you start measuring what you value,
Hmm.
the value of it uh,
Goes
is
down, is it?
immaterial. Yeah,
Okay.
it's sort of you sort of fall in love with what you value, and then that value is sort of immaterial, and it sort of clouds your judgment.
Okay.
That's the long and short of it. I've botched it up, but I'll give you an
Hmm.
example. Right, this is during the Vietnam War.
Hmm.
During the Vietnam War, and he was a statistician. McNamara was a hardcore statistician. His measure was there's a body count is really high, we are winning the war.
Okay.
He completely lost the plot that perception in Vietnam and in the US was against the war. He never counted for it because his measure was body count.
Hmm.
Body count is high, I'm doing quite well, right? And therefore, conscriptions in Vietnam were all time highs because the Vietnamese were, we have to win this war, and as body count increased, they were able to change perception there.
Okay.
And if you look at the McNamara fallacy, it's very, very interesting to look at it in conjunction with Goodhart law,
Huh.
because when a finance person comes and tells you,
Huh.
you put out this video now, what is the benefit of this video? Why does not it does not have as many views?
Hmm.
I had a colleague who literally got like a Bangladesh bot farm to get this to 1 million views. It doesn't matter. The
Yeah.
1 million really did not matter. He spent like 10,000 rupees to get it for 1
Yeah.
million, right? But
Yeah.
at 200,000, it was very good. It
Huh.
did its job. But when you start looking at vanity metrics like that, you
You
tend to
at
lose the
times get
plot,
the wrong
which
results.
is the McNamara fallacy. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. So I remember at Gojek, and my one
Hmm.
of my question here is that at what point should a brand move towards paid marketing, which is the first point you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
And I remember in Gojek, as you've been doing a lot of storytelling, as you or you did,
Yeah.
at one point you did a huge marketing
Yeah.
campaign. So both the questions similarity that
Yeah.
why did you think of now moving to a paid marketing,
Yeah.
and when should a brand move towards paid marketing?
The very simple answer on this, when your owned is tip top, then you start paid. Logic also is very simple. As someone who is in a consideration phase, if I come to evaluate you, I have to look at your own channels. I have to look at a quantum of earned channels.
Yeah.
I can never tackle earned until my owned is perfect, right? Like, how can I tell an influencer or anyone to review my product if I have not established what my product stands for in my own channels, right?
Got it.
So, if my owned is tip top perfect, my earned automatically kicks in, and then I can start looking at spends because every customer I acquire, they come and check out my channel and they have a fair enough understanding of what I do. So for me, owned number one, and this is typically how people do it. My only contention is in your own channel, sometimes your messaging is all over the place. Your website, your blog, your social, all of that
Everything is
is all
different.
over the place.
Yeah.
And then the odd time when you start doing earned, which is like a podcast or an interview, or when you get to do a lot of these promotional material, you tend to falter and your website says something else, you are saying something else, and then that's
Everything
when
is go here and
everything
there.
breaks. So, simple answer, owned has to be 100%, then you look at paid. And Gojek basically, I keep saying this often. In my about 9-10 months later, if someone come and came and evaluated my performance, I'd probably be fired and then be like, "What have you really done?"
Yeah.
Right? Because it was all this janitorial work, cleaning the website up, making sure the blog was fine, speaking to employees, making sure the presentations are good. They all have a singular language, sending them communication of what are the 4-5 things that make this brand stand out. What are the 4-5 metrics you should be talk about to augment this brand? Basic things like that. Yeah.
Got it. So that brings to another one. So you did the janitorial work of cleaning up things,
Yeah.
and you were lucky to have a great manager
Hmm.
to allow you to do that and not look at immediate performance.
Yeah.
That's where the struggle starts.
Yeah.
Somebody who joins a company wants to prove,
Yeah.
the manager wants to get something done.
Yeah.
How do people set those expectations right?
Yeah. So one is I had the luxury of time, and I took about 9-10 months to really get this cracking right. I feel if I were to do it now, I'd probably do it in 3-4 months, right?
Okay.
Because I have a better tool set. I think I have better tech understanding of things. So my own knowledge of this has improved, right? Um, so there are a bunch of ways, but I feel the one I'm not good at is stakeholder relations, right? I
Okay.
generally struggle with explaining why you have to wait for this to really trickle down, right? uh, and I'm also sort of improving in these aspects. But another one is to look at, if you break this out and say, uh, in a week, what is that easy metric I can move? If
Hmm.
you're able to explain that and if you're able to showcase that, it's easier to get the job done. I think the best way to do this is, if you plot out a north star, right? Like, let's say you want to get a customer.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm talking about this from a SaaS perspective as
Yeah.
just an example. If I have to go and get like a big brand to come and work with me,
Hmm.
then you line item out, here are 15 things I need to do, right? And then you look at the lowest denominator of what those 15 things are, and some of that has to be moved in weeks. And you have tools to enable that these days. So l- line item it, discuss it clearly that these are my actionables, and then you start moving some of this. Again, my I'd always obsess about quality of input metrics. Outputs will happen if your quality of input metrics are really good, and if your input metrics are not good enough and it's reflecting in your output metrics, then your strategy of what you're doing in input metrics are probably wrong. Then you need to rethink that whole value chain. And I'm saying this from an example of SaaS, but from an example of employee branding, it's very clear.
Hmm.
If you're talking about interesting challenges that you have
Yeah.
and interesting features you're building, that's fodder for someone who wants to come and join you. It's
Absolutely.
as simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've done employer branding at Gojek and at
Yeah.
Misho. One
Yeah.
is a backend here in India, and Misho is anyways a consumer-facing company.
Yeah.
Uh, Employer branding are very different for both the
Yeah. Yeah.
companies. Do you think a consumer-facing companies need employer branding?
I absolutely think so, because if you look at Misho's problem statement, was no one from tier one uses Misho, right? It's a tier two,
Yeah.
tier three product. So again, how do you build perception? Very difficult to get talent if you can't talk about what is it that you're building. Unless you have that well chalked out, very difficult to really. Again, a lot of folks think of this as like a line item as employer branding, but I think of this as more of feature building. I think of it more of interesting technology pieces that you have.
Yeah.
So if you look at Blinkit, for example,
Yeah.
their biggest employee branding advocate is Albinder, but I'm sure he has folks under him who are sort of
Feeding.
who giving him feedback and feeding him like, let's talk about a feature, let's talk about this product, and so on and so forth. As long as you're able to flesh out interesting things your company is building,
Yeah.
and you're able to talk about it, nothing
Interesting.
like it. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's where the good part is when you talk about good product, good features.
yeah,
Your team starts also building more of it
yeah,
so that it
yeah,
gets
yeah,
showcased out in the market,
yeah.
and then you have a great loop.
Yeah, you have to have differentiation, right? I think as any brand, if you look at Flipkart and Amazon, there is clear differentiation. Let's take search, for example. There is a differentiation in how search works in Flipkart, how it works in Amazon. If you take recommendations, clear
Yeah.
differentiation, right? Uh, then the ability to explain how we instrument this from a technical and a non-technical point of view is pretty much what makes the brand. And this can go across the board, right? Like, so I'll give you one example at Gojek. This is a design story, right? How you look at a cart button
Hmm.
has a significant impact in the number of orders GoFood at that point had, which is basically saying, uh, um, there was like a small little
Hmm.
insight, right? A bunch of users didn't want to order from Gojek because they were not able to explain that they want food less spicy or they want no onions, so on and
Okay,
so forth. So the option was there. They just didn't know it was clickable. Like you
got
have to
it.
click here
It
and
was
edit
hidden
it.
somewhere.
It was hidden. And that impacted number of orders, right? So then you have to look at it from a design change to say, I'm going
Hmm.
to put a hover button over here that will tell you that you can actually edit this. It's such a
Correct.
beautiful insight that ultimately adds to your cart value. And there are tons of these examples because engineers and product people, they test this day in and day out. They A/B test this. So what do you need to do as a marketer is to first understand A/B testing
Yeah,
happens, right?
absolutely.
And go and sit and speak about this. And then it's the liberty of the company and the people around it, right? Are they liberal enough to tell you, let's talk about that failure? It's interesting, right? And
Yeah,
that's a playground, and that also speaks to culture because the moment I'm able to talk about these changes and these
hmm.
failure points, it's great for engineers because they're like, so many experiments are being run over here. I want to work in a company that I'm able to test
Correct.
these out. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah.
interesting. Storytelling has taken,
Yeah.
a big part of your career, and you have invested a lot in it. Uh,
Yeah.
I see today a lot of brands are moving away from storytelling,
Hmm.
or maybe outsourcing it in a way.
Okay.
How do you? What is your way of thinking
But
here?
why do you say that brands are
Outsourcing.
moving away from
So moving
storytelling?
away, I would not. Maybe some are moving away, or some are giving it outsourcing. The
Okay,
only
got it.
reason that is time.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
and it takes time. That I can't do that.
Yeah.
Let me do things which are low hanging fruit. I'll get
Yeah.
immediate result because storytelling takes time.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you have to write, it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Get insights, do it.
Yeah.
Outsourcing, you have money, you throw money at a problem.
Yeah. Uh, I think the best brands that I have known own their narrative very closely. And they typically don't hire agencies to get a lot of this brand work done, at least the initial ones.
Okay.
Once they have that base layer of what they need, then agencies are they're very good at amplifying this to 10x, right? Because then you hit a distribution layer. I think some really smart agencies work under the layer that once you have a base set, they're able to come and critique it for you. And
Okay.
really smart and smooth operators are able to critique what insight you've generated. And they're also able to benchmark this because they have data velocity, right? So then you go and benchmark this with others, you go and speak to potential other brands. Because
Hmm.
sometimes as a founder, a lot of founders that I meet, they're so clouded with their own product, they
Yeah.
don't understand. And even people, right? They're so obsessed with building their product, they don't know where they're missing this niche or
Correct.
whether this makes sense, right? Um, I think storytelling is going to be there forever. You
Okay.
look at even the most niche brands, it's going to be there forever. It's something that's just not going to change, and it is why brands will exist forever, right? And in fact, I would argue the contrary. That
Hmm.
like let's take the Jaguar
Hmm.
one that
Yeah.
recently happened, right?
Yes.
Probably 99% of the subset who commented on Jaguar will probably never own a Jaguar. They're not in the consideration set for
Absolutely.
Jaguar, but they have
Yeah.
strong opinions around it, right?
Yeah.
And they obsess over how can you remove the vintage
Yeah.
Jaguar for this, right? Highly opinionated, even though they have no stake in this
Stake in
whole
it. Yeah.
process. Um, and I think that's how great brands are also in some sense built, right? If you have a strong opinion on it, it matters for you enough.
Yeah.
But sorry, I've lost track of the question here.
And that's fine.
Storytelling
Yeah,
narrative, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
How has that
yeah,
impacted, and do you
yeah.
also believe in it? Like for example, what I said, a
Huh.
lot of brands are moving away from it, but you
Yeah,
have stuck to it.
yeah,
So should they stick to it? Should they use it to their
yeah.
advantage?
100%, and even the public markets will vouch for this, right? So I'll give you two examples on this. I'll give you an Indian one
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
US one. It's an example I quote often a lot. There's this professor from the New York University. His name is Ashwath Damodaran,
Oh yeah. Yes,
and
the finance guy,
yeah,
the valuation guy.
valuation
Yeah.
expert,
Yeah.
right? So when he valued Uber, he valued it about, I think, about 6 billion or
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
And when he put out his valuation thesis, there's a legendary investor. His name is Bill Gurley.
Yeah.
Bill Gurley comes out and Bill Gurley says, "You've got it all wrong. Uber is not a transportation company." And he valued Uber as transportation company. By the way, again, importance of monikers. How do you define a company? Very
Yeah.
important that you control the narrative, right? And he basically came and said, Uber's not a transportation company. Uber's a logistics company.
Okay.
Words have consequences, right? And this is what Ashwat Damodaran himself says. And the moment you change the narrative, Uber was valued at 35, $50 billion. The
Wow.
whole narrative of it changed. One of my favorite examples to narrate. And I can quote tons of examples.
Yeah.
A book recommendation, and this is again something I tell a whole bunch of people, and probably sick of me saying this, but there's this person called Ed Bernays,
Hmm.
and he wrote this fantastic book called Propaganda. I shouldn't be saying fantastic, but it is what it is, right? A lot of lessons in this book.
Huh.
It was published in 1929,
Wow.
and he's considered the father of PR. Like Ed Bernays is considered the father
Hmm.
of public relations, and he in this book, I don't know if it's there in the book, but there's a story.
Hmm.
Marlboro basically
Hmm.
comes and tells Ed Bernays that hey, we want to increase cigarette sales, and one of the insights we have is women don't smoke enough,
Yeah.
right? And Ed Bernays looks at this data and he said, okay, let's figure out how do we do this. And
Hmm.
he does this very simple thing. He calls a journalist and he says, be there at this time at this particular location. He calls 6 women models and he makes them hold cigarettes and they light them to smoke a cigarette.
Hmm.
And then he tells the journalist to click a picture with just one caption, right? And the caption is just 3 words: torches of freedom.
Hmm.
It's just 3 words, that's it. And this singular act catapulted Marlboro's sales,
Wow.
cigarette sales exponentially, right? It's one of my favorite examples because it speaks to what you can do with power of storytelling,
Training.
right?
Yes.
And this storytelling is
It's
replete
very,
across the
very
board.
relevant, very simple, very, very
Yeah,
crisp.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there are tons of these, right? And storytelling arcs can also funnel into how you look at a product. I gave you the example of metaphors for why Bentley's is so heavy, the
Yeah.
car door is so heavy. I'll give you another example of the Ben clock. I think it's called the Ben clock.
Hmm.
It's just a simple clock. I forget the designer, and they wanted him to design this clock, and he just made the clock heavy. Again, association of premiumness to a clock,
Yeah.
extremely high, and therefore
Went
extremely
up.
valuable as well. Yeah,
Interesting. Interesting concepts.
yeah,
In terms of employer branding,
Hmm.
we did touch upon various aspects of it.
yeah,
uh, when do you think a company should start doing it? While I agree that they should
yeah.
always do it, but when is the situation when they should definitely do it?
I, employer branding is so easy to start because there's a lot of it is own media,
Hmm.
right? Day one,
Day
and
one.
it starts straight from the founders, right?
Got it.
A lot of people do it now really, really well.
Yeah.
I see 10, 15 member teams do a fantastic job. One example that I've recently stumbled on is Swish,
Yeah.
which is a 10-minute food delivery app.
Correct.
A lot of people post on their socials, right? And associate, and I'm sure they also reach out to people who find this magic of 10-minute delivery. The moment they get their food, they want them to post about it.
Wow.
um, Great example of employer branding because it's essentially the same thing, right?
Correct.
10-minute food delivery, great quality of food, yeah, employees posting about it.
Yeah.
Very easy if you do this right from the beginning, harder if you have to build it eventually.
Got it.
But employer branding is the lowest hanging fruit, easiest thing to start off with, and it comes straight from
And
employees.
what all should they do? Like what you did mention about social media, putting posts,
Yeah.
anything else which they should be doing for this?
Largely the attack vectors on social channels. Another really interesting one is events and conferences, right?
Okay.
If you have an interesting proposition or if you have a strong insight, if you're able to go present that at an event, then you can organically build that into 10 other artifacts. You can put videos on social channels, so on and so forth. But there is nothing like winning trust if you have that one person in front of you explaining about a product. So, without naming examples, I'll
Hmm.
quote this one.
Yeah.
Right, there was this one particular popular person who spoke negatively about a brand that I sort of consulted with.
Yeah.
Right, uh, and some of this was valid. A lot of it didn't make sense and probably did not come from a strong understanding of
Hmm.
what the product does. Right, but then there was a lot of communication out there that wasn't favorable. The simplest thing we did was invite this person to an event where one of the founders was talking, and then one face to face, and then I can't name things,
Hmm.
but a lot of positive perception organically started happening from this very popular person, right?
Wow.
So if I look at this metric, everyone is in a sort of rat race to build their own brand, right? So if you are favorable to a large volume of people, they are likely to be favorable for your brand on social channels organically. You don't have to pay a penny for it. And the best way to do that at scale is an offline event, because you have 200 to 300 people. You're there, you spend about 1.5, 2 hours, you try and interact with as many people as you can. Lots of positive earned perception that you build very, very
Interesting.
instantly. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm sure over the years you would have had issues of limited budgets.
Yeah.
How and for us, majority of our audience are SMBs
Got
who
it.
have limitations on budget.
Yeah.
According to you, when you have shoestring budget, what all
Yeah.
marketing activity should one take?
So one is everything to do with social channels, right?
Okay.
You have to talk about differentiations.
Yeah.
Have to talk about all of this. Another one I really like is, and this again depends on brands, right? But
Yeah.
let's say you're a consumer-facing brand, right? A great way to understand is what are the kind of trends that you are seeing on Google Analytics, for example,
Yeah.
right? Then also look at a platform like Ahrefs to see what is your SEO content ranking like. A
Got it.
great platform to do that. Another one, and this is a great hack, by the way, a consumer facing brand, an idea that I gave them was there is this attribution layer that you get called Clearbit,
Okay.
which basically tracks from which companies people are visiting you, right?
Hmm.
So let's say if I'm a consumer brand that sells protein bars, for
Hmm.
example,
Hmm.
right? I know that there are certain events, large events, where employee companies and the HR team or whoever gives like a goodie bag.
Correct.
Why can't that goodie bag be a protein bar?
Hmm.
Is a classic
Example. Yeah.
example, right? So if I have an attribution layer where I'm using Meta, Google, or whatever to
Hmm.
advertise my products, and then I'm seeing that I get a indexation of a large chunk of people from, let's say,
X company, Y
X
company.
company, why can't I reach out to X company and then pitch that X company saying, hey, I have clear data that about 30 people from your company have visited my website or order from the products from my brand. Would you want me? I can work out a deal where I can give this products,
Absolutely.
right? So
So, which tool did you
basic
say
things for
this
that.
is?
This is
Clearbit.
Clearbit,
Oh
yeah.
wow, it's
And
an interesting
yeah,
one.
it's a very powerful tool. You can, and it directly comes to your Slack channel.
Okay.
And the best way to do this. And this is, I think, as a marketer, I've done so much general consumer marketing, branding. I love doing SaaS marketing because it teaches you a lot about tooling, number
Yeah.
one, and it teaches you to be extremely frugal. You have
Yeah.
real
Absolutely.
shoestring budgets, and then how do you look at marketing from that perspective is
Interesting.
essentially
This
what
will
SaaS
be
is.
a real insight.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should definitely use this
There
somewhere.
are tons of these. There are tons. I'm thinking what else I can share on these. Mm, the ability to build a lot of microsites
Okay.
is a great attack vector for SaaS companies or even small companies.
What do you mean by that?
So I'll let's take the protein bar example,
Yeah.
right? If I, as a protein bar, if I build a small microsite, which
Hmm.
is probably about 10 days work
Yeah.
with great design and great
And today with AI, you can actually make it in a day or two.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
very easy. If I'm just building a microsite and I'm just marketing a microsite, which is a simple game
Hmm.
where I can build my own ingredient
Hmm.
and I can build my own bar
Hmm.
by mixing these ingredients from in a microsite. And then if I say, if this protein bar gets 10,000 people
Hmm.
who like it,
Hmm.
and if I can get a pre-order
Hmm.
of X amount, which is let's say about 5 lakhs,
Hmm.
I will build this protein bar and ship it. It makes economic sense.
Your product research is done in
If
a way.
everything is done, I have my product research. I'm getting insight. I'm getting the someone who's coming and literally playing a game,
Yeah.
right? And there are tons of ways to do these,
Yeah.
especially for SaaS companies.
Yes.
A company that I really like who does a lot of these interesting things is Postman. They do a lot of fun things. Another worthy mention, and I should say this because I really like these folks, are Plum.
Okay.
Plum does a whole bunch of things that are not directly material to their business but have long term impacts. For example, they recently published a comic book called Aesop Fables. I've not read it yet. I
Hmm.
just got it yesterday.
Okay.
Uh, it's terrific, right? I don't know what the bottom line is for connecting it to health insurance, but it's a book that I'm probably going to hold. And if you look at the insight over there, you probably have people who can decide whether I need to go with Plum as my insurance provider
Hmm.
of choice, right? Are probably married people. And when they get this book, they're going to read it to their children, top of the mind recall.
Yeah.
And I'm likely going to put Plum in my consideration set. So I think marketing before were campaigns and large campaigns and institutionalizing those campaigns.
Yeah.
But marketing now is doing
Small,
small
small
things,
things.
but having a thematic layer to what those things are.
Yeah.
The difference is bad brands, I mean, bad companies do a lot of things, but they don't have a singular umbrella on what they want to attack. Brands that know what they want have a singular attack vector, but do a
Do many
lot more
things under
things.
that
Yeah,
factor.
yeah,
Interesting. I would definitely want to touch upon your article which you've
yeah,
written in March
hmm,
about chicken sexing and how
yeah,
you have related it to marketing.
yeah,
Can you explain a bit there?
yeah. You know, the number of DMs I've got on chicken sexing is staggering. Actually, now,
Really?
a lot of people, and whenever they have a peculiar phenomenon which they cannot explain, a lot of people attribute it to chicken sexing now, and they ping me. By the way, it's not my idea. I read it in a very popular book. I just attribute it to marketing because it makes a lot of sense. The name of the book is called Moonwalking with Einstein.
Okay.
Highly recommended. Extremely fascinating book. It's a book on memory structures and creating a memory palace and the mind. But as a marketer, I took
Moonwalking
insights.
by Einstein.
Moonwalking with Einstein.
With Einstein.
Yeah,
Okay,
with
got
Einstein.
it.
So anyway, chicken
Yeah.
sexing is this very interesting thing that happened in the 1920s, where the male chick is a pain for a poultry farmer because the meat is stringy. It doesn't really reproduce, so it's useless.
Yeah.
So they want to get rid of the male chick, and so they can have more female chicken. The problem is it's very difficult to identify the sex of a chick.
Hmm.
Uh, and therefore, they used to spend a lot of money rearing it, and after a particular point, you could then realize, okay, this is a male
Yeah.
chicken, and then I had to throw it. So the budgets that they spent were extremely high. So they had to figure out a way to identify sex of a chicken. And it turns out when you look at the rear of a chicken, there are a few cuts and vents and a few things you can look at, and you can identify the sex of a chicken. Someone in Japan basically understood how to do this, and then there was a school started called Zen Nippon School of Chicken Sexing, something of that sort, right? By the way, I think only 5% of the people ultimately pass through the school as well, so very
Wow.
high bar, right? And the moment you pass from the school and you're a validated chicken sexer, you earned about $500 an hour, which was massive then. You'd literally be flown in charter planes to different countries across the world to determine
Do
the sex
this.
of a chick. Yeah. So if you look at the act of doing this, you have to look at the rare and you have to move to the next. In a farm of about 20,000, you have about 3 seconds to do this, right? In 3 seconds, you have to determine the sex of a chick. It's a hard job, and a lot of people did this with a fair reasonable degree of success. So a bunch of researchers want to understand how do these chicken sexers determine this in 3 seconds. And tons of research, reams of written material around this. Bottom line, they just could not determine how a chicken sexer is able to determine the sex of a chick. And the bottom line answer to that was they just know. Yeah, right? And that's what I read in the book. These three words, they just
Just no.
know. And it was a matter of experience, it was a matter of knowledge, and just sort of
Yeah.
understanding it. And it was interesting for me because there's a brand story in it in terms of what works and what
What
does
doesn't
not work.
work? Yeah.
Yeah,
At times you don't know the explainable part of it, but
yeah,
you just know that this will work and this will not.
yeah,
Especially in creatives, it happens a lot.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
few people just get it right.
Yeah, there's an
Majority.
emotional quotient to something that sometimes we don't ascribe to,
Yeah.
but is very ingrained. Another example of this is uh, Surf Excel and how they look at it. Right, it was so radical for Surf Excel to say "daag achhe hain."
Hmm.
Right,
Yeah.
it's a terrific line. It's contradictory to what the brand is. Right,
Correct.
ideally,
Correct.
I want to say I'm the cleanest, I can
Yeah.
clean, but
Absolutely.
daag achhe is such a great insight, right,
Absolutely.
which ascribes to the
Yeah.
brand value. We spoke about Raymond's The Complete Man,
Correct.
right? It's a beautifully orchestrated sort
Absolutely.
of moniker. It's a matter of taste. And I think there's also pitch for marketing, right? Now that we have AI and whatnot.
Yeah.
The reason why you would hire a brand marketer is because
For this,
when
and
you're
AI
long enough in
wouldn't be
the
able to do
job, yeah,
it.
when you're long enough in the job, you just sort of know
No.
what works and what doesn't. Yeah.
Interesting. Great. That brings me to the last one. Your
Okay.
favorite ad.
Uh, I actually want to write a long post on this, which I haven't.
Okay.
It's an ad for Johnny Walker, Blue Label. It's a beautiful ad of Jude Law and this other gentleman,
Okay.
and they are in this fancy yacht,
Okay.
and Jude Law wants to buy this yacht, and this person says this yacht is, you just, it's priceless, you just can't sell it, and there's a
Hmm.
bottle of Johnny Walker right there, which ascribes the you can buy a Johnny Walker,
Huh.
but the taste is an emotion. It's
Interesting.
priceless. It's just sort of inexplicable. And then the ad goes on to Jude Law basically says, I don't want to buy it with money. I
Huh.
probably can't afford it, but I want to wager a bet. I want to do a dance and I want to buy this. And then they go to this place. Jude Law sets up this beautiful studio where he just dances. And the dance and the music and the way he does this is so beautiful. The other gentleman automatically wants to tap along and dance as well. And then they have a glass of Johnny Walker, which symbolizes this idea of premiumness.
Hmm.
But also, what I like about it is you typically look at men and then you say dancing a little
Huh.
awkward, right?
Huh.
But it's just so classy, and that is what the brand stands for as well. And
Interesting.
one of those
I'll
great
definitely go
ads.
and give it a
Yeah, you should
watch.
absolutely watch it. It comes in two parts. Again, it's about a 3-4 minute ad,
A long form,
a
which is
long
good.
form ad.
But then that story needs it.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically a story. It's not an ad. It's
Yeah.
just a well narrated story, and I think it's one of those that's absolutely phenomenal.
Interesting.
I'll give you another one. Volvo does a fantastic job.
Okay.
Three components to it: production value, great storytelling, and great music. Right, three things that come together. This is with this. I think he's a wrestler. Jean Claude Van Damme is the
Yeah, yeah.
person.
The one where he
Yeah,
puts leg
yeah.
on the two
Yeah,
trucks.
basically there's two trucks and he
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
splits on it.
Yes.
The sheer audacity and confidence to say that, right? So that ad touches a lot of parts, right? But one is ingrained the stability of the product, and someone like Van Damme saying, "I'm so confident doing this because the product is so
Yeah.
beautiful." Right? There's no other greater testimony than
Correct.
that to make it happen.
Interesting.
Yeah, there are tons of these, but
But
these
yeah,
two
thank
stand
you
out.
for this, and you should definitely write a blog.
Yes,
It'll be
should
super
a
useful.
breakdown of the Johnny Walker ad for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Great, Aditya. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
It
Thank
was
you so much.
lovely interacting with you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
to be here.
Yeah, bye. So that was Adithya Venkatesan on the Empowered Marketer. The three takeaways for me from this show is one, the art of storytelling. Whether your company is in the stage of formation or a 10 years old company or above, one should keep doing the storytelling about the company, about the products, about the features, etc., etc. And you should talk about it. If you are not comfortable talking about it on social media, get somebody to at least talk about it, because that's how people will get to know about what you are doing and then they associate with you. Second one is brand monitoring. That how do you speak to your customers, your partners, your customers, and your team members, and understand what values do they ascribe to your brand. That will help you in fixing problems, or double clicking on the values which they perceive, and how do you go deeper in that. The third one would be overall employer branding, which is again, like storytelling, you should start from day zero. Talk about what your brand stands for, what your company stands for. Get your team members to speak about it if possible, and if things are good, they will anyways talk about it. So one should always put some emphasis and do employer branding all the time, because in longer duration it will help your company, your brand, or your startup. So those are the three takeaways from me. I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I have done interacting with Aditya. Thank you very much, and look forward to our next episode. Please subscribe our channel so that we can keep sending you updates. Thank you very much and have a good day.